thinkers, and Happy New Year. Welcome to 2021. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, never has a single year been entered into with such high expectations. Perhaps there will be a return to so-called normalcy, or more likely, the pandemic has changed how we work, live, and play forever. I'm not being a pessimist. I'm just saying we got some big changes that have happened to us. And in recognition of all this change, the ANA recently named pivot as the word of the year. And I wouldn't be surprised if the agility marketers showed in 2020 will be equally tested in 2021. But here's my question. What are you doing to make sure your brand is differentiated? Or more specifically, how are you going to distinguish your company, brand, or product from all your competitors? Sure, you can pivot from physical events to virtual events, but that's a small pivot. What's your big pivot? Are you going to rebrand? Are you going to change your name? Are you going to create a new category? Are you going to introduce a new product that will radically change customer perceptions and or make it easy for them to try your product? This is a show about big pivots. And for that, I have the perfect guest, Anthony Kennada, the CMO of Front. Anthony may well be the youngest CMO we've had on the show, and his meteoric rise from brand development associate at Box in 2009 to the CMO of Gainsight 4 years later is nothing short of astounding. During his 6 years at Gainsight, he helped grow this startup from zero revenue to over 100 million. And in 2019, he wrote a book titled Category Creation: How to Build a Brand that customers, employees, and investors will love. He joined Front in November 2019. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Drew. Excited to be here.
Well, you know, I sort of wish I had a big drum roll there. I mean, man, that's without the applause, it's a pretty big introduction. Let me first say, I know you stayed on as an advisor at Gainsight, and I saw the big Vista acquisition putting at $1 billion valuation. So congrats on that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been awesome to see it from now the other side. I think it's exciting validation, not just for Gainsight and what we were able to build there, but really around customer success being a actual profession, and one that companies are willing to put a price on and willing to really bet on. I think from the marketing perspective, we were really excited to help establish that. And I know we're going to probably cover a little bit of that here on the show.
We will definitely get there. And did I see, were you like employee number 18 there?
19.
19.
Yeah, there's a few of us, a good proportion of the team was based in India. And so it felt smaller. It was about 10 or less of us in the US when I joined.
Wow. Okay. All right. So first of all, how are you and where are you?
Thanks so much. I'm doing good. I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona, where we now call home after about a decade living in Silicon Valley. So doing well, and just excited for all the hopefully, I'm pretty optimistic. So hopefully some of the good things to come from 21.
Well, all right. So here's the big question. I know, there's a lot of CMOs in the audience, and they know that it took a long time for them to get to that role. You went from BDA to CMO in 4 years. How does one do that?
Yeah, totally. I think the biggest lesson for me is meeting great people in your career and really valuing the relationships that you've developed, because relationships are, I think, our biggest currency in business. And so for me, I started my career out of college actually as a tech recruiter, but used that as a way to find my way onto the sales floor at Box back when it was, I think, 35 employees or something along those lines. So had a chance to come in early. And again, I think you have to, give a little bit to luck, and from that perspective of getting an opportunity with a company that would end up being, as iconic as Box has become. And so after about 1.5 years, 2 years at Box, I left to join a company called Live Office. And I'll spare the full story here, but that CEO was the eventual CEO of Gainsight. And so
There
that
you
kind of
go.
comes into play in a second. Um, we built that business. We sold it to Symantec. At Symantec, I transitioned to a product role. Actually, what was one of the younger product leaders at Symantec for a while. And I love the big company thing, but I was sort of getting to get back into startups. And as I was doing that, Nick, our CEO from Live Office, was drawn to this new opportunity for a company based in St. Missouri that was tackling the customer intelligence, customer something. We didn't have the language around customer success quite yet problem. And he was going to come in as CEO. And he remembered me, I think like a PowerPoint presentation I gave at Live Office or something in the early days. And he gave all on a Sunday evening. I'll never forget it. Asking me if I wanted to be a part of the with him, and jumped at the chance to work with him again. And, from that point on, my job at Gainsight was obviously to build a marketing engine, but beyond that, I wanted this CMO. I did not want to be hired over. I wanted to grow and scale because I was told, like all of us are, being, not everyone scales. Not everyone, scales up with the business, and the outlier there. And Nick just gave me a lot of encouragement and feedback along the way when I was moving off course, and then gave me the opportunity to just that.
It's so it's so interesting. I mean, clearly one of the great advantages of going to a small company is that you can sort of learn on the fly. And
Yeah.
you took a big chance leaving Symantec and going to a startup again, but clearly you have the startup sort of fever, I guess, is you're attracted to them and they are attracted to you. So as you're starting up at Gainsight, you really build a demand gen engine before? Where were you getting your information to guide what decisions you were making?
The answer is no. In fact, I had to Wikipedia what demand gen was to sound smart in my 30, 60, 90 to Nick. But I think he knew what he was getting into. No, I was a first-time marketer. So I'd done product before, so I had pretty good context on the product marketing side of the house, positioning to engineers, talking to customers, and building customer empathy. And on the sales side, the biz dev side, understanding a bit more of the commercial side of the business and how the kind of revenue funnel all worked. So I had exposure to marketing, but I hadn't done the job. And I think what was interesting about our journey there is, had I had a lot of the context or bias around how to do marketing, we might have taken more of the traditional approach to building Gainsight, to building a Gainsight brand, to growing the company. We might have done the paid search kind of effort. We might have, done of the quote textbook mark work, and our company might have failed. Instead, we did a lot of we really chased a lot of our principles around how do we radically serve this persona we had identified called the customer success manager. How do we champion them? And we look to our intuition and do a lot of things that only now looking backwards really helped serve to build this market and then ultimately to monetize the thought leadership we had developed and to grow the company. And that's where I think the confidence came from ultimately, was we started to see that our intuition was working and that maybe there was a playbook that we were kind of co-authoring here as we were building the company.
Yeah, I just remember as you mentioned the PowerPoint that you had done that the CEO had recalled, and he calls you on a Sunday. I love that story, and it just reminds me to remind younger listeners that what, every presentation matters. Particularly early in your career, and you may think it doesn't, but man, look at how opportunity knocked here for Anthony on a presentation. I'm sure you didn't think at the time that this is going to lead to a tremendous opportunity.
I can't even remember which one it was, to be honest.
Right, but obviously you showed some enthusiasm, if nothing else. So I'm curious. You talk about intuition. One of the things that I heard was you were really focused on a very specific target.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such an interesting thing because a lot of startups really struggle to find their focus.
Yeah.
And, it's sort of, well, let's try this and let's try this, but they don't really know who their audience is. And as a result, it's very hard to put a effective plan together. Talk a little bit about the audience that you were going after at Gainsight.
Yeah. So we had observed, and this is the first couple months in the job for both Nick and I, that there was a persona that existed called the customer success manager. And we didn't name, I think Salesforce gets the credit for actually coming up with that term. But this was a small group of people who would meet in different office groups around Silicon Valley for these meetups. They would meet for kind of peer-to-peer best practice exchange. And what we had observed was they were responsible for the ongoing relationship with a customer after sales closed the deal, but there wasn't in the marketplace that was really fighting for them. That was build educational resources, the networking to really kind of give them a platform to more effectively do their job. And so as a result, what we saw is this was a group that, although still emerging, didn't have a lot of the influence within the organization or buy power for technology, or really a seat at the executive table. So our big thesis was, what if we could be that brand that fought for them? And we're by no means, would we come in and say we are the experts in customer success, but with humility, say, can we facilitate that discussion as a brand, and then be the place people come to talk about world-class customer success. And that was the early hypothesis that tested by doing an event. We said, look, there's these events, these meetups that we're observing. What if we hosted our own event? Would people come? And so imagine basically barely a Series A company with 5 to 10 customers hosting an industry conference for customer success. We were fortunate. We ended up having about 300 people show up. Jeffrey Moore and Aaron Levy were speakers, and people were left thinking, gosh, there's a movement starting here around customer success. And then for the folks in the audience, they found a community that they could belong in. And that was the compelling moment where we're like, gosh, if we can keep fostering that feeling of belonging within these personas, within these people, we might, hopefully we can build a great software company, but surely we would do something that would be meaningful for them.
Perfect. Okay. You had me at community, and I think it's a perfect place for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into sort of this moment where you realized, oh, we could really create a category here. All right, stay with us. Okay, we're back. And we're talking about the early stage where this is, every startup dreams about having a moment where they say there's an underserved target that has a lot of commonality across the board. They're underserved in terms of the product. They're underserved in terms of the content they're getting. They're underserved. And that's where the business opportunity is. And somehow or other, this is where you found yourself 6, 7, 8 years ago. Anthony, talk about what, as you're starting to, you did this event, and that showed you that, oh, wow, there's a lot of interest in this topic. What happened from there?
Yeah, the most interesting piece was at this event, we didn't talk about our software at all. We didn't talk about our product. And yet all of a sudden we had folks that were curious, like, what is Gainsight? Like, so what do you all actually do? And why are you hosting this event? And so what we found is that thought leadership didn't just generate like buzz and awareness and excitement, but also turned into some leads. Like, people wanted to talk to us. So that's where we said, we need to triple down, because this is our marketing strategy, or at least we believe this is. And we obviously can't host an event every quarter. So we have to find ways to really scale this idea of leading with thought leadership, leading with value to this audience. And then over time, looking to sort of monetize that once they've developed enough intent. And so just the quick, we can dive into some of these, but we launched the online blog and sort of content resource for best practices around customer success. We did a series of virtual events every year. Obviously, we're much easier to scale. We developed even like a career program, so an online certification pathway for people that want to get certified in customer success, a place to connect with job seekers and hiring managers so they can grow their career. We wanted to develop the oxygen around customer success and have all of those different programs be things that we provided as a brand. And so that sort of that single event turned into an entire 6-7 year marketing strategy for how we were going to grow the company.
I love it, and I'm going to pause and break some of those things down. But I'm reminded early on. So we've been hosting the CMO huddle since April, and one of the things I never forget, one of the CMOs saying, and this was about June, as they were doing some of the things that you're talking about. He said, the less we sell, the more we sell. And I thought it was great to hear at that moment, because there was so much pressure in second quarter, third quarter on CMOs to like, we need leads, the pipeline is closed, we need it. So that the solution, the traditional solution would be more webinars and more emails and assaults and ABM. And in fact, what people really needed was help in certain ways. And so, to the extent, the other thing that I wanted to mention is this whole category that you're talking about, we at Renegade call it marketing as service, where the marketing has inherent value to your prospects and customers such that they want to consume it. And what I love about all of this is these pieces work together, as you said, to build oxygen, the blog, the virtual events, and even the career. And what's so interesting in this is, you are a category. Here's one of the things: when you're the guys who are training people on how to do the category, right? And so that makes sense that you went to certification. I mean, in some ways, the playbook that HubSpot wrote, right, for inbound, they created the whole thing of inbound, and then they certify you on inbound, and next thing you know, they have this really big share among small businesses in the space. So let's talk about each of these things and individually and what you learned. Because look, having a blog is not a big deal, but and doing virtual events are not a big deal. But you got to do them well. What did you learn, and how did you make sure that your online blog continually sort of added value to this community?
Yeah, I think there's three major kind of learnings that we had. The first is that quality, and we had to make sure that we were delivering that value. To use your language, the marketing as a service had to be valuable to the audience and couldn't just be, a commercial for Gainsight or anything that's extremely biased. The second is we wanted to make sure that the best practices weren't coming solely from Gainsight, but that they were coming from customers or from just other companies in the market that had a story to tell. So we took a posture of facilitating this discussion versus necessarily being the ones to lead it. And I think that helped us build trust out in the market. And the third thing is cadence. And this is something that people, I think marketers take for granted. We come up with the idea to launch a podcast or something, but by episode 6, 7, or 8, we're on to the next priority and we've deprioritized it. People expected to hear from Gainsight. We became like a television network or a programming network, and people subscribed and wanted to be a part of getting their news from the industry from us. And so we wanted to make sure that we were constantly releasing new content and through all of our different channels, so that we were this alive and thriving kind of brand and not just a passive brand in the market.
Those are really good. That's a great summary. I mean, quality is a little tricky to define, but you can sort of tell relative based on consumption. Did the folks read it or download it or whatever? I want to call attention to a couple of things. One, you don't have to be the expert on everything. And in fact, it's hard for brands to do that. So to the extent that you can get third-party voices, particularly customers, to be the ones who are sharing the content, that's awesome. The cadence thing is interesting to me. I think I read somewhere that podcasters, it's something like 80% give up before like 3 months. I think this is, we're well into our episode 200 plus on Renegade Thinkers Unite. And by the way, I wanted to mention that I recorded 30 episodes before I got 5 that I was happy with. I mean, it takes time sometimes to get these formats to a place where you can get them to really be as good as you want them to be. If you go down a content heavy road, particularly like a podcast, brace yourself. Yeah, this is a big commitment.
Yep.
Okay, so I love those things. The expectation, I want to talk about cadence. What did you ultimately decide was the right cadence for you all?
Yeah, I'm smiling a little bit because I don't know if this is a best practice necessarily, but we were dropping emails, weekly, in some cases several emails. And so we had a monthly newsletter that went out. We had certain webinars or programs that call it every other week when we were promoting our content. Email is effectively the best driver of attendees for us. I wish it were not true, but send a ton of emails to get folks to our event. Moments where we were probably sending 3 emails a week to folks that were in our subscriber base. And I think what's interesting, and this is a point you brought up earlier, I think if you think about the brand that's sending this content as almost like a lifestyle brand for your profession, like I want to get, in order for me to be plugged into what's happening around my career, whatever, like I need to follow this brand. And so the emails aren't annoying. They're not spam. They're just part of the doing life with in customer success. Now we also had some unsubscribes. And so that wasn't something that we took for granted. And so that's where this focus on quality was really important for us to make sure that, what we did send resonated and mattered. But, we had to do a lot of air traffic control with our customer success team who was sending their own emails, our product that generated some emails. And so, this idea of centralizing customer communication, prescriptive with how this works and maintaining a good customer experience. It's a good set of accountability as you go off and do this, run the programs.
Yeah, I mean, this is when companies get bigger and then everybody wants to email the same group different things. But I think the key thing here, it's not spam if it's a value and an interest to your target, and they let you know because you see it in your unsubscribes. Let's quickly, before we take another break, when did you sort of feel like you had created a category?
That is such a hard question. Like there's probably 2 moments. First is we weren't setting out to create a category, but we started showing up as a reference for category in different blogs. And as folks were talking, they talk about HubSpot, and obviously the classic and perhaps most iconic example for what they've done on marketing. And then, maybe I think Salesforce gets some credit for what they've done with the cloud in general, just kind of evangelizing the cloud. And then we'd hear our name, little Gainsight, kind of, mentioned with these massive startups. And so that's where we first started getting conviction and things like, we ended up writing a book about this called Category Creation. We ended up, speaking on it, Nick and I both on different kind of, conferences and stages. So that's the first signal. But I have to, back in December when the news of Vista and Gainsight kind of happened, that's where I think it really kind of sank in for me that this wasn't just something that we all believed as a community, but it was something that analysts and folks outside of our own echo chamber could really go and validate. So that when Vista, their majority investment and committed, I think to me personally, that was kind of a big milestone for
Well,
us.
it certainly was validation of the idea. I would say from other interviews that I've done on category creation, it's not a category of one. It isn't a category until you have competitors, and it isn't a category until those competitors are using the same language, if you will. Like everybody's using ABM now.
Right.
So we could probably call that a category, although you get 20 definitions when you ask anybody what it is. The other sort of key measure in tech is, what do the analysts say? And where do you fit
Yep.
into their maps, right? And if the analysts are breaking it out as its own thing, then the world will start to believe you. All right. Well, I think the key though is, and this is so interesting, is set out to serve a community, not to create a category, because creating a category is useless. It's creating, being of service to a community. And once you have that community, they're the ones who will validate it, right? They'll show up at your events. They'll consume your content. They'll want to be certified by you. And if the more that you certify them, the more it becomes a category. So it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about this that much, but we're talking about big pivots. And the big pivot here is own a group of people and service them like this is the only people in the world. And if you do that through your marketing, you have a lot better chance of success than if you simply say, hey, let's get a demand generation program that targets these three groups.
Totally agree with that. And I think that's something that COVID and this year has really helped us kind of shine a light of why that's important, not just from a economic, value perspective, shareholder value perspective, but the loyalty that customers feel to brands that we're here to help them during times of difficulty, in times when the world was, the business world wasn't, things weren't going kind of as well as they should be. Customers remember that. And it's a chance to really build a lasting generational brand. I think it's an important nuance to keep in mind.
All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about your current job and what's happening at Front. Okay, stay with us. All right, we're back. And we have been talking about category creation. You, Anthony, you took the job at Front in November 2019, so pre-pandemic. What was your charter, if you will, or mandate?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. Front, unlike Gainsight, serves a pretty market. So, that our job was to really help grow the TAM of people in the profession of customer success. At Front, there's over 1 billion knowledge workers in the world who use email for work. So my job was to basically help us really, two things. How do we tell a story that's compelling, that can, inspire literally 1 billion plus people to use the product? And then how do we go and build the actual back end infrastructure and monetize that thought leadership? So not dissimilar from Gainsight, but on a much, much bigger scale.
Right.
So,
And so before we get too far, help explain just in 10 words or less, what is Front?
So Front is a customer communication hub, and we bring teams and customers closer to, and we use the email inbox as the sort of design metaphor for doing that.
Customer communications hub. Okay. And it has to do with email. All right. Has to do with email, which is ubiquitous and painful and all those things. By the way, are you a zero inbox guy?
Thanks to Front, I'm much better than I used to be, but I'm still not completely there.
Yeah, it is. There's a great book on getting things done, and I tried to get there and I couldn't get it done, but I'm okay. I can live without zero email inbox. Now, let's talk about the challenge of you. First of all, give us a sense of how big, where is Front is sort of the scale as a startup?
Yeah. So think of Front, we're about, 200 employees at this point. I think I joined around 150, something along those lines. And we're, you can think of us kind of in the, when I joined, it's about 30 million of ARR, and kind of growing from there. So we're about, size of a Series C kind of business. By no means are we a early startup where we're, fighting to keep the lights on, but I think there's still kind of, a lot of opportunity to grow the business kind of moving forward.
Right. Okay. So, we were talking a little bit about your mandate of telling a story, and what what what's happened? What have you done? You've been, what are you, when you look back at the year of 2020? What's on your greatest hits?
Well, I think that the biggest kind of the first step to really making it come to life was we had built tools customers could use to better communicate with customers. We were all with their customers, but we were really viewed as a tool set. And I think from a brand perspective, we have more ambition. We have more ambition than just being a set of tools, but we wanted to be a strategic partner to our customer, to the market at large, that believed something, that had this sort of emotional conviction that there's something in the way that we work that should change, and that we're not satisfied with the current status quo. You talked about getting things done in the email inbox and getting to inbox zero. It was really, the place where everything happens for us at work, whether we want to admit it or not. And there's stress there. There's stress when our inbox piles up, and there's stress and relief. The inbox is in much better shape. So we think that we have a right to speak into this experience with work and tell a bigger story. So we worked with a brand that helped us really articulate our why. We were in market with the what, and it got us to a pretty good place. But we knew that if we really wanted to build an iconic company, and we'd have to do a better job of talking about the why. So we did a lot of research. We did ethnographic research outside of our bubble in to New York City. We went to Charlotte. We went to Minneapolis. And we tried to understand what's the human relationship with work. And we found that ultimately people were tired of prioritizing productivity and busyness and hustle and all of these different components that are so ingrained in how we work today in the modern economy. And what they really wanted to do was make an impact. That was the highest emotional benefit people wanted to get from their work. I want to know that I made an impact, whether that's on me and my career, my team and our ability to deliver a project, or my company and my company's ability to make our mission possible. And so that's something that we've started to really express through the brand. We did a rebrand. We relaunched the website. We're starting to talk a lot more about the why. We're starting to develop a lot of the content platforms that we're going to go and kind of bring into the world. And the idea is, again, not too dissimilar from Gainsight. If we can really own this message about graduating from productivity to impact, especially after 2020 and the year that we had there, I think there's a big opportunity for us to develop a more emotional connection with the market.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm thinking of Tom Peters' line. His advice is, focus on contribution. And it's such a simple notion, but it's so difficult because you have a million tasks. And as any individual, you always have to think, his advice was, how are you going to contribute? And your word being impact. How are you going to have an impact? And so many people think about, what are they going to get done? And that's fascinating. That's such a great insight. I'm curious how you brought that story, because it starts at home, right? I mean, you have to get your employees to also think about impact and not focus on action necessarily, unless it leads to greater impact. Talk about that and how you brought this story of why to your employees.
Yeah, it's not. It wasn't easy. I'll admit it. I think that coming in, especially as the new CMO, again, about as the company's mid-flight in, there were a lot of folks that had been there for 4 years plus, and they, were sort of pretty happy with the story that was in market. But I think the leadership team, and particularly our CEO Mathilde, she had the belief that there's kind of a bigger story to tell. So had some championing with her, and so the best way I did it first was we had to design a process that was incredibly transparent so that folks across the company could feel heard, could provide feedback, and can get regular updates on kind of how we were making progress. So when we got to the final destination of, really positioning Front as a customer communication hub, really talking about impact at more than talking about just simply productivity, they felt like they were along for the journey. And they felt like they sort of were co-authors of the story. So that was the biggest kind of way we did it. But, part of that activation happened when we were all working from home. And I think it's a lot harder to really kind of stir up the culture and the cultural element around that organizationally when we're all from home. So it's something that we continue to kind of develop the programs and the steady drumbeat today to make sure folks are well equipped to defend the brand strategy and to get excited about it.
And I have to say, I mean, we talk a lot about this on the show and in other rebranding efforts, that the one regret that CMOs often have is they didn't spend enough time with the employee target before they rolled it out. But it sounds like in this case, you really did brought them along. And I just want to put a nice little bow on that point, because if your employees don't believe in the why and can't sort of execute against it and don't see how it's part of who they are and why they come to work, you've failed. You're not going to get there. And so it sounds like you got them along for the ride. I'm curious how you brought your customers into this, and because they're also you're asking them to think about what you've been doing for them differently.
Customers were a big part of the process for us. So we, as we were doing a lot of our stakeholder interviews, we made sure that a lot of our kind of representative customers from different kind of industries and titles and disciplines were all kind of brought on board. And then as we sort of went to activate the message in the market, the first place we started was with like a customer preview and getting some feedback, roundtables, that sort of thing. And so we were able to kind of implement the feedback before we actually brought that out to the mass market. And the feedback we heard was that they were able to say it back to us. They were able to kind of feel the intended outcome that we were hoping to create by taking a more emotional kind of approach to building the brand. As a result, what we started to see in the market is people using the language. Going back to our earlier conversation, they talk about impact. They're prioritizing impact more in their world, and we're hopefully able to kind of keep building on that momentum, kind of moving forward.
And so let's just talk about measurement. You've used the term emotional. By the way, I love the fact that you previewed this with your customers. Again, it's one of those things that folks often skip, and to be able to make an adjustment even better. Because again, if your customers don't believe what you're putting out in the marketplace, you've got a real problem when you go for testimonials and they're using different language. But so emotions are kind of tricky to measure. I mean, that's tracking and brand studies and things like that. And you've got investors and they want to see net new logos. What did you, as you're doing this sort of emotional, teach people to think about not only that work differently, how do you measure success in that context?
Yeah, there's some leading indicators, and then there's ones that we can, more confidently point to on a board slide and say, hey, this is working. The leading indicators are, as we're releasing, our own podcast episodes, as we're releasing, other types of content, how are folks engaging with that? We went from basically, very little blog views. Our blog was basically a glorified company announcements portal more than anything else. We started seeing increase in traffic, and we started to see folks downloading some of the kind of, gated assets that we kind of launched on the blog. So that was helpful. And we looked at, what are the company domains? So, oh, wow, we're actually getting access to, some larger, more upmarket customers as we're sort of launching more of this low buying intent, high kind of interest pieces. And so then ultimately, where does it show up? And which is where the board's most interested. Where the way we've set up front today and the legacy of the business, it's a trial-based kind of product. And so it's kind of this product-led growth motion where people can sign up for a trial, never talk to a salesperson and get going. So the first place that we want to look is, are we able to generate more sales as a result of now kind of being in market more? And the answer is yes, but it's nuanced because the nature of evangelical around a brand and starting a movement behind it, the stuff takes time. It's less intent, but it's high value to the audience. You're able to cast a wider net, get more traffic to the site, but the lagging in there is engagement on else. And so we're doing better, but I think overall what we're realizing too is we need a better kind of pricing and packaging approach that can better capture this more value selling led effort that we're going into. So that's a sneak preview of the work on our plate this quarter is ensuring that our pricing and packaging support the value selling motions that we're creating.
Right. And I want to sort of call attention to one thing on this is when we talk about building a new brand that's purpose driven, the chances of you seeing that show up immediately in on the revenue with net new logos it's really hard. And as you said, it takes time. I mean, 6 months, 12 months to actually begin to get people to associate an emotional idea with a brand and have them take action, right? Particularly when you're talking about something that involves new behavior versus just replacement behavior. And that's what category creation is all about, is new behavior. So I think it's interesting. And I think where you're headed, and this is what, to the extent that if you're doing that and you're building awareness, anything that you can do to generate trial without any friction, if you can be the MongoDB where they can download your software for free, use it, get to know it, and then you can, life is a lot easier. And then this 1-2 punch of brand building and sort of free trial can sort of make hay. Is that a good summary there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And you find that that becomes an awareness game, and you want to get as many qualified eyeballs to your site as possible, and for them to kind of engage with the product. But you also want to meet customers where they are, right? Some customers want to talk to someone. Some customers, especially as you go further up market to the enterprise, again, persona. But in some cases, they want to better understand how this fits into their existing strategy or into the problem set that they're looking to solve. And so we want to make sure to create many different pathways for folks to engage with front.
Well, this has been really interesting, and I know I could continue, but I'm afraid that our listeners they're finishing up their workout and they're going, okay, Drew, wrap it up. So I'm wondering, as you look at 2021, and you've got a group of CMOs, give us 2 do's and a don't when it comes to sort of creating a category and the big pivot for 2021.
Yeah, I think the first, let's see, a couple do's. Do focus on the persona and an individual kind of within an organization that you're marketing and selling to, because we're coming out of a year where we've all felt disconnected and long human, and if you have a brand that helps facilitate that, now is the time for us to get, hopefully, again, optimistic, get back together again, whether that's literally or figuratively. And the second is try and develop a lifestyle brand for them. So what does that mean? Develop the content programs, the podcast, the community. All of these different things are a strength of how you can go and actually activate that promise that you're making these folks out into the market. I think don't lose hope. Have some patience. As Drew mentioned, this stuff takes time, and so you need to make sure that you keep kind of the content cadence and quality high, and that you're understanding kind of the data and the performance, but that you don't give up when things don't immediately kind of convert into revenue in the first 30, 45 days of the program. So those are the do's and don'ts. And I think just one thing in general for next year, I think we're all hopeful that it's going to be a good year for marketers and a chance for us to really make a difference in the communities that we serve. And so use that as motivation to really aim big and get your pivot on for 21 in a way that will make deep impact for you, for your company, and for your customers.
I love it. All right. That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Anthony, for spending time on Renegade Thinkers Unite. I think that a couple of takeaways for me really is sort of universal is the big pivot starts with, as you said, the customer, and thinking about the customer and thinking about how you can add value, relentless value through the marketing. And in doing that, as those pieces start to add up, particularly if it's why driven, right? Why are you doing this? And if you can articulate it in a really simple 10 words or less way to help folks understand, oh, I get it. This is why you really are going to have an opportunity to do something amazing in 2021. All right. If you've stayed with us this far, I really appreciate it. Give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast channel. Share it with a friend. Visit us at renegade.com. All right. Anthony, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Drew. Appreciate it.
Renegade Thinkers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neisser. Audio production is by Sam Beck. Show notes are written by Melissa Caffrey. The music is by the amazing Burns twins, and intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all the episodes, suggest future guests, or learn more about quite possibly the best B2B marketing agency in New York City, visit renegade.com. And until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.